Assalamualaikum and hi. In the previous video, we have looked into how to use the FileReader and also the FileWriter classes, and specifically the read and also the write method within these classes to read and write from the text file. But there are some limitations regarding this FileReader and also the FileWriter classes, because as you can see from the codes that we have written, the FileReader and also the FileWriter classes handle the data character by character, which means it will involve a frequent read and write from the text file, and it will actually cause the performance issues due to these very frequent read and write operations. That's why this leads us to the videos that we are going to go through today, which is related to the BufferedReader and also the BufferedWriter class. So in simple word, buffering is about storing data in memory or buffer so that it will significantly reduce the read and write operations or processes. Of course, with that, it leads to the enhancements or improvement in terms of the performance. Now let's start by looking into the BufferedReader class. So as usual, we will need to have an import statement to import the BufferedReader class, which is also from the IO package. We will also need to have the FileReader class, where later on we are going to wrap this FileReader object when we initialize the BufferedReader object, which I'm going to show you later on. And finally, the IO exceptions class for exceptions handling. We have the public class here. We have our main methods, and now we need to create a BufferedReader object. So if you look into this, it might be a little bit complicated, but I'm going to break this down for you. The first part of this line of code is actually something that you have seen earlier, where this is how we create the scanner object, the file object, and also the FileReader object. Now to recap, for example, when I create a FileReader object, I just do FileReader, the name of my FileReader object, for example, FR, is equal to new FileReader, and I have, for example, the file name, which is input.txt. And if I want to create a BufferedReader object, then I would just do BufferedReader. The name of my BufferedReader object, for example, in this case is reader, and then new, the keyword here, and BufferedReader. I'll keep the parentheses empty for now, okay? And if you look into this line of code here, basically what I do is I wrap a FileReader object. So you can see here, this is how we create a FileReader object previously. And now I wrap that object, which means I just copy this and paste it here within my parentheses. So basically this line of code is exactly the same as this one. So here we have two different parts. The first is we create a BufferedReader object, and within that we wrap a FileReader object. Now, once we have the BufferedReader object, we can now read from the file. The structure is very similar to how we read using the FileReader class. The only difference here, as you can see, is instead of using character here, if you still remember, we declare an integer and then we do a casting for FileReader object. Now for BufferedReader, we just declare a string here. Next, we have a while loop here to read from our text file line by line. So the while loop will continue as long as there are more lines to read in the file, right? As long as it's not null. And what we do within here is we print that line. And of course, once we finish the file reading operations, we close it. So if we run this, my buffered FileReader.java, well, actually I have already created the input.txt in my NetBeans project folder, which is here. So within this text file, actually, I have also two sentences. Java is fun. Let's learn it together. So now if I run this file here, remember, if you want to run that specific file, for example, in this case, it's my buffered FileReader.java. So I just need to right click on that file and click on run file. And you should be able to see the output, which is Java is fun. Let's learn it together. Now let's move on to look into how we can actually use the BufferedWriter. So I've created a file here, my buffered FileWriter.java. So of course, we will need to import the BufferedWriter class. We will also need to have the FileWriter class as well, because similar to how we use the BufferedReader where we wrap the FileReader object, in this case, we will also need to wrap a FileWriter object. Now, here you can see something which is very similar to what we have discussed earlier, where I have created a BufferedWriter object with the name writer. And within that, I wrap the FileWriter object. And we are going to use two specific methods belong to the BufferedWriter class here. The first is the write method, which is to write specific strings into a text file. And we also have a method, which is the new line method, to add a new line character. So this is a little bit different with what we have learned in the previous video, where if we want to add a new line, we'll use /end. But when we're using the BufferedWriter class, you can just simply call a method which is new line. So here specifically, I write 3 different strings into my output.txt. And in between these strings or these sentences, I add a new line, which means you will see 3 different lines here. And of course, once I have done with the writing process, then I will close the BufferedWriter. So now if we run this file, my FileWriter here, you can see here, file successfully written to the output.txt. And if I open the folder here, my default folder, and open the content of output.txt, you can see the 3 lines which have been written into my output.txt. So I think that's it for this very short video regarding how to use the BufferedReader and also the BufferedWriter classes for text file manipulations. Thank you very much.